Alrighty, hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Joe. I'm going to be talking to you about finding novel forensic artifacts. Don't let the background worry you. This will not be as bad as sitting through the new Matrix film. My talk will be shorter. So let's get to it. So, a brief overview of what we're going to look at. We'll start off by looking at some threat actors, and this will demonstrate what we're up against. We'll have a couple of case studies detailing public information from InfoSec companies, and that will get us all onto the same page. And then we'll dig into a case study of a novel artifact I found while I was doing some research one weekend last summer. Finally, I'll round off with some tips on finding your own novel artifacts, and we should have some time for some Q&A, maybe. So, who am I? I'm a student studying cybersecurity and forensics. Before university, I was a site reliability engineer, and I've been doing forensics research since the summer of 2019. And since then, I've worked at a financial institution and a cybersecurity startup. But we won't be talking about that today. Much NDA, such sad. So I'm currently working and researching in the field of incident response. I'm a first-time speaker, but a long-time attendee of security conferences. So our first case study is a pretty well-known e-crime actor known as Wizard Spider. They're known for TrickBot, Ryuk, Conti, primarily. Their main goal is to exfil your data and deploy ransomware. They're pretty opportunistic, but they do big game hunting, so they'll only target your organization if you've got a couple million in the bank. Their timescale is really short. They'll deploy their ransomware within a matter of days or weeks, and they're pretty overt as well, so they'll leave a lot of evidence behind in logs, just malware lying around on your system, and, like a ransom note saying who did it and that they want so many bitcoins paid to their address. Until this year, it was pretty safe to target Western companies from Russia, but given what's happening with the Revil gang, that does seem to be changing, so I'll be watching their career with great interest, and these guys particularly have been subject to another leak since I made these slides. I always appreciate it when a threat actor welcomes themselves onto a system that they've popped. The screenshot is from the slapstick backdoor, which we'll talk about a wee bit later. Our second case study is known as Light Basin, or UNC 1945, depending on who you ask. They are highly targeted. They'll target specific industries, as well as specific victims within those industries, and they will conduct espionage over a period of many years. They're also really covert, so they'll hide their tracks. They'll go to great lengths to hide their tracks, even to the point of creating their own custom anti-forensics tooling, like log bleach, which again we'll get to a little bit later. They've also gone as far as to replace the IP tables binary with a Trojanized version that will wrap legitimate IP tables commands and obfuscate the rules that they've added to facilitate the backdoor that they've put onto your system. They also demonstrate some familiarity with telco infrastructure, like eDNS, which is used for roaming on your mobile, and they have the ability to capture subscriber information and call metadata. So they are really sophisticated. So a couple takeaways so far. Wizard Spider are bad people. Light Basin are bad people. But Light Basin also use some really sophisticated anti-forensics techniques. These guys are essentially the complete opposite end of the spectrum, with a very overt ransomware gang and a very covert, most likely state-sponsored actor. So in terms of what we're talking about today, the highly sophisticated actor is by far the more interesting. So I'm going to take a look at the tools, techniques, and procedures that are used by Light Basin, starting off with Evil Sun, which is a zero-day exploit in Solaris PAM. And this is about as bad as it gets. It's got a CVSS score of 10. It's a remote code execution. We got the slapstick backdoor. So once they've gained access, they're going to insert their PAM backdoor onto your Solaris machines. And the backdoor is used to maintain persistence. So even if the initial vulnerability is patched, which the zero-day does now have a patch, they can still maintain access because they've backdoored the system as well. You've heard of lol bins, but just in case, what they are is living off the land, binaries and scripts. This is essentially components of the operating system which can be abused by attackers to do bad things. This is anything from downloading stuff to signed binary proxy execution. And these present a real challenge to defenders because they're present on the operating system and they have a lot of legitimate uses. So Light Basin's been known to go even further. They'll bring along their own virtual machine, which is complete with an arsenal of post-exploitation tools like Mimikatz, Powersploit, ProcDump, CrackMapExec, PoshC2, and more. So Mandiant described it as, you've heard of living off the land, well, how about bringing your own island? Ping Pong is an ICMP signaling implant that CrowdStrike discovered, and they've actually got persistence with this thing by adding a line to the System 5 init script for SSH. So it's quite a subtle way of making sure that this thing is going to run.
So as about having content here, really close to the mic still today quite well.
Okay, so we've talked about log bleach. So log bleach wipes evidence out of some of the most valuable logs, things like syslog and auth-log. And it can also, it's got a whole bunch of logs that it's actually going to wipe by default, but you can also add additional logs to that as well. So this really complicates the incident response because all of the best sources of information are actually just wiped out. Finally, Steal Corgi is a packer that's executed in memory. Packers are basically used in malware to make reverse engineering more challenging. So hunting this adversary is a really complex task. It requires a skilled team familiar with OS internals, telco networks, and able to understand the few novel artifacts that this actor doesn't wipe. So despite Light Basin's finesse, Mandiant and CrowdStrike have disrupted numerous intrusions and shone a light on the activities of this actor, but at this time they remain an unidentified cluster, and cluster is definitely the right word. So Exhibit makes a good point here as well. There is a difference between novel sources and novel malware or tooling. Basically, sources should point you to the malware, or what the malware did, or what the threat actor did when they had hands on keyboard. So to fully understand the malware, you're still going to need to reverse engineer it, most likely. For this talk, we'll be focusing on the sources. And we might want to do this for a few reasons, but usually it's going to be a case of building a more complete picture than what's available with the usual stuff. Also, if you're a consultant, there's no guarantee that you've got optimal logging or monitoring configured. You might just need to work with whatever you've got. And we've also got advanced actors like Light Basin, who are actually going to wipe out all of the well-known sources of information, and the novel artifacts might be all you've got. So we're going to go into the case study for a novel artifact that I found. This is a really easy to understand small example. It's based on my blog post. It went down so well on Reddit that I had to turn it into a talk. The artifact is found in your home directory on Linux in a file called .wget_hsts, but this is configurable with a command line flag, which is --HTSS file, and then whatever file you want to put it in. And I'm sure anybody who's ever had to administer a RHEL server can relate to our editor. So what is wget_hsts? Well, wget is a command line downloader, and it's really popular on Unix and Linux platforms. It's often installed by default, and so admins love it because you can download stuff from GitHub or anywhere on the internet and run that in a script. So this can be really useful if you want to, if you want to get a bunch of a program onto a bunch of servers and you just want to do that with a script. An admin might do that legitimately, but threat actors love it as well. This is a small example of the kind of thing that you might find in a cron tab file. So this will download a file that is totally not a web shell and pipe it into your shell. And it will do that every 20 minutes. So this is just a very basic persistent mechanism, and they could have added the no HSTS flag, and it wouldn't have even shown up in the HSTS cache. But anybody who would leave this in your cron tab is probably not too worried about getting caught. Also, if they were being really modern, they might use a systemd timer instead of cron. So HSTS is RFC 6797. It's about 10 years old, from November 2012, and it's become really popular with the Encrypt the Web movement because we want to really mitigate adversaries in the middle. So this works as a big stepping stone towards HTTPS everywhere. As long as HTTP is supported, unless you give the protocol to the browser, the unencrypted HTTP version of the site is the thing that has to get requested first. Because otherwise you just get a certificate error. Essentially, you'd just break all unencrypted sites if browsers didn't do that. So HSTS is a way that websites can assert to always be available over an encrypted channel. So the browser will actually cache a header that it then knows the next time it requests the website, even if you don't give it the protocol, it knows to request it over HTTPS instead of HTTP. So browsers have even gone further than this, and they'll allow you to preload HSTS. And that means that the browser actually hard codes the site as HTTPS in the browser, and it entirely disallows downgrades, entirely disallows any way to access the site over HTTP. So wget obviously doesn't support preloading. But preloading is important because otherwise that first visit to the website could be unencrypted. So if it was, and you had an adversary in the middle that first time, they could strip out all of the HSTS, they could strip out the upgrade to HTTP, because what normally happens is you would request the site over HTTP, the server will redirect you to HTTPS, and also give you the header to say we're HSTS compliant. HSTS is getting super popular as well. One of my laptops has over 1,000 entries in the cache from just the few websites that I browse regularly, and that doesn't include anything that happens over the private browsing mode, because that stuff doesn't get cached permanently, or doesn't get cached at all. So the adversary in the middle can passively eavesdrop on an unencrypted connection, but they can also actively inject an attack. So there isn't really any such thing as a site that doesn't need encryption. Encryption forces the adversary to compromise a website, which might not raise the bar by all that much, but it also makes attacks necessarily more targeted. So what does the file look like? So we've got a host name, which is the HSTS-enabled hostname that wget is connected to. We've got a port, which is a non-default port, but the manual page actually says it's just for testing purposes, so it's not really used at all. Whether the HSTS policy supports subdomains, which is stored as a boolean. Creation timestamp in epoch time, which shows the time that the website or host was last connected to by wget. And a max age, which is the duration the HSTS policy is valid for. So lines starting with a hash or comments, and they're just completely ignored, but we've basically just got a version information, a little warning not to edit the file, and some table headers so that we got a rough idea of what these different things are. So 31 million seconds is a year, and that's the minimum that's required for preloading. They recommend these days to use 2 years instead. It was a little bit more liberal when I did it. And the entries don't seem to get purged from this cache. So I've got entries in my cache from 2018 that expired after a year, but there doesn't seem to be any process that actually goes in there and cleans them up. So what can we do with this information? Well, we can remove all of the HSTS stuff, get rid of the comments, convert the epoch timestamp to UTC. We can order that as timestamp and host, and sort it for chronological order. You can do all that with a one-liner that looks something like this. And this can be a really useful way to just triage one or a small number of systems. But what you can also do is integrate this into some larger tooling and then import it all into Splunk, which might be a little bit more useful. So there's a few gotchas. Mostly, this is not a wget history file. So this is only going to include HSTS-enabled hosts. But as we've said, that is quite a significant portion of the internet. It's also not going to give you the URL path information. So you might know that a host was used to download something from GitHub, but that doesn't mean that you know what was downloaded from GitHub. However, if it's suspicious that the host downloaded something from GitHub in general, then that might be enough of an indication to know that something's up.
Right. So, okay. Yeah.
I just external.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Joe. Sorry, we're out of time. We have to move on to the next talk.